All right, AP Environmental Science. We are continuing with Unit 8 today. This is still topics 8.9 and 8.10, which deals with solid waste and waste removal. Today, we're going to talk about a couple of different topics, but we're going to start today talking about landfills and incineration. Again, we've talked about the waste stream. When you throw something out, when it leaves your hand, these are two places that it could end up. Okay, it could end up in a landfill, and we'll talk about really what those are today. We talked briefly about those in the last lecture, but they also the things that we throw out could end up getting burned or incinerated. We'll talk about what that is today as well. All right, so let's first talk about a couple of terms here. The term dump, which is what you kind of see in this picture here. And if you kind of remember, if you watch the Bangladesh tanneries video, in that video, sort of in the background, you kind of see this quite a bit in Bangladesh. You see these like giant, like just mountains of garbage. In that video, there was like kids like sledding down them, and it's like kind of gross. But in those countries, like dumping is totally illegal. I mean, it's totally gross and totally bad for the environment, but they don't really have anywhere else to put their garbage, so they just put it in big piles. And you can imagine, the pollution with this and the diseases and all that kind of stuff. But in the United States, it is completely illegal to do this. You cannot create a garbage dump in a city or a town or even a rural area just because of the legalities of it. I mean, it's not a good thing. So in the US, what we typically do is we create landfills. So instead of piling the garbage on top of the soil, we put it underneath. Now, landfills aren't just holes. I mean, it's not quite that simple. These are things that have to get engineered. I mean, there are people, and this is maybe a job career that maybe some of you are kind of interested in, but it's called environmental engineering. And this is just one aspect of environmental engineering. It's planning, for how to engineer or create a garbage landfill. This is not really. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just digging a hole in the ground. So let's take a look here at this picture. We'll kind of look at some of the components of a typical landfill. First of all, you see in the background, right? You see the city back. Let's just say this is Chicago. Okay. One of the things when they plan landfills, they're not just going to build it in the middle of the city, right? They're going to build it typically as far away, in the outlying areas of the city as possible. Now, in Chicago, a lot of our landfills are actually on the south side, which, typically is a poor area of the city, high minorities there. This brings up, again, some issues of environmental injustice, which we talked about before. But that's typically where some of these garbage landfills get generated. So here we have the big hole in the ground, right? But when they design this landfill, a couple things have to be put in place. First of all, the inside of the hole has to be lined typically with a couple different layers of soil that is very heavy with clay. You guys might remember back in our soil unit, we talked about clay pretty much being an impermeable type of soil component. So by lining and compacting these landfills with clay, it doesn't allow some of those more toxic chemicals to eventually seep through and get into the surrounding soil. So a clay liner is usually something that is, well, not usually, it's always put in place inside of these landfills. Now, another thing to consider is something called a leachate collection system. Leachate is basically any of the liquids, that can, permeate through this landfill. I mean, is the clay liner perfect? No, it's not perfect. Does it hold back most of that leachate, yes, but some of it actually may get through, or it may just continue to build up inside of that landfill. So they typically will create a series of pipes. This all has to be engineered. People have to know what they're doing. That will kind of collect all that leachate and eventually transport it somewhere else. Now, where else it goes, I don't know, but I'm guessing it has to be collected and something has to be done with all of that leachate because most likely it's toxic waste. Now, another thing about landfills that has to be properly engineered is something called a methane extraction system. We talked about this the other day. There's a lot of decomposition happening in here. If you look at this picture, over the top of this landfill is a bunch of grass and soil. I mean, they don't leave it like this. It's not like exposed, to the outside atmosphere. It'll stink and it'll attract flies. So they typically cover them up. Um, Now, when they're covered, again, that stops any oxygen gas from getting into the landfill, and that creates an anaerobic environment for the bacteria. So when those bacteria are anaerobically decomposing, all of the organic material, then they're going to produce methane gas as well as carbon dioxide gas. It's another thing that they reproduce, and methane gas is explosive. So and flammable. So if that stuff builds up inside of this landfill, that can be problematic. So what they have to do is they have to allow for some of that methane gas to escape. Now, in some cases, the methane just goes up into the atmosphere, and we have to be concerned about that because it is a greenhouse gas. There are some landfills where they're engineered to actually collect the methane gas, which is natural gas. It can be used for things. And that will probably be much better, but not every landfill is designed that way. So, again, these have to be kind of carefully designed and engineered so that they have the lowest or the least amount of impact on the environment as possible. But do they have an environmental impact? Of course they do. So again, this is just here is just kind of a summary of what I kind of just talked about. You know, they build the landfill, they fill it with trash, and then they close it. And they just allow all of that trash inside to decompose. And again, all of that methane and all that leachate has to be collected before it can do damage to the environment. Now, a lot of landfills, they're multi-purpose. I know up in Chicago, they built a golf course right on top of one or right next to one, called Harborside Golf Course. So they use the land, where the landfill is, and they just kind of have a multi-purpose use for it. That actually is not a bad idea. You don't want to build any structural things like buildings and schools near them because again, that methane gas can build up inside and seep into those structures. That would probably be kind of a bad thing. But just make sure we kind of understand landfill design. Now, again, some environmental consequences. Just about in every single landfill, you're going to have some type of leaching. You definitely don't want to build them near, rivers and lakes, and definitely not near underground aquifers. But in some cases, they don't have a choice. And if they're old landfills that were constructed, 40, 50, 60 years ago, they probably didn't even think about there being a source of groundwater underneath them. So there could be some contamination there. Once landfills are capped, we just talked about this. Once all that oxygen goes away, then we have to worry about all the gases that get produced inside. Again, all that methane gas can be problematic. Choosing a site for a landfill. This is called siting. It's basically how town planners and town managers or city planners decide where they're going to build these landfills. Typically, they want to find a soil that's very rich in clay. And if it's not, then they have to bring the clay in and line the landfill with it. Again, keep it away from rivers and lakes and streams and any source of potential drinking water. They want it far away from human population if at all possible. but close enough for trucks to bring the garbage back and forth. But again, typically, politics play kind of a role in citing landfills. We talked about NIMBY before, right? Not in my backyard. So a lot of communities kind of use these policies to say, well, I'm sorry, but the townspeople here have voted, and we don't want a landfill or toxic waste or nuclear waste or all these things for the environment that we don't want near our homes. They don't want them in their towns. So what ends up happening typically is they put these things in poor communities, and again, that brings up these issues of environmental injustice. All right, now another thing that we do with our garbage is we burn it, we incinerate it. Now, obviously, just straight out burning your garbage is against the law. You can't just do that. However, we do have facilities, in our country and around the world, especially in developed countries, where we can actually burn our trash and we can generate heat that actually will help to create electricity. This is called waste to energy, and it's actually, very similar to how we burn coal to produce electricity. Now, one of the things about waste to energy is if you're gonna burn garbage, kind of like burning coal, you're gonna produce a lot of air pollutants. So it is absolutely important that we have things like scrubbers and electrostatic precipitator, which we've talked about before. I'm not going to go back into detail on these, but these are things that remove air particles, like particulate matter, for example, from air, so that it doesn't get out into the environment. So if you're going to be burning garbage, these things absolutely have to be installed. So let's kind of take a look at the process here. I mean, it's fairly similar to burning coal, right? I mean, here you've got all of the garbage being dumped, right? And all of that garbage, if it's burned, it can produce heat. Not as much as coal. This definitely is not as efficient, probably as a coal burning power plant. But when you burn all that garbage, not only do you generate the heat, which can boil the water, and right here it's just kind of showing you just all that steam will go to the turbine, and that's not included in the diagram here, but you get the idea with that. But the thing here is with all of this garbage, the pollution level is through the roof. I mean, I'm talking about bad for the environment. I mean, when you burn the garbage, you're going to produce solid waste, like solid ash. We call that bottom ash. So right here, just by burning the garbage, you've got hazardous waste. That stuff that needs to be taken care of. Okay. Then you've got all the gases. All those gases that are produced, they cannot go out into the environment. They have to pass through a scrubber, right? Scrubbers use water, to help remove particulate matter. So here you're going to have some polluted water that's going to have to be treated and removed. And then you've got your electrostatic precipitator here, which is going to remove even more particulates. We call that fly ash. And again, that has to be taken care of. So, and then eventually, once it passes through, both of those things, then whatever's left can go out into the environment. Now, I will say this: these scrubbers and these electrostatic precipitators are not 100% effective. What comes out of this smokestack here, there's still some things in there that we probably don't want in the environment, but we've probably removed a good chunk of them with these devices. But again, you've got pollution just about at every level of this thing. I mean, it probably would be a lot better if we just didn't burn the garbage at all to generate electricity, and probably find a much cleaner alternative. I mean, nuclear would be a lot cleaner, but there's nuclear waste involved. Windmills would be a lot cleaner, but there's dead birds involved. But that's probably a lot cleaner than doing this type of thing. All right. Some incineration issues. I mean, just things that we've kind of talked about. Again, there's issues with all the solid waste. Um, NIMBY issues. Again, people don't want incinerators in their backyard or in their community. Air pollution. Two things when it comes to burning garbage. I mean, mercury is one. Mercury is difficult to filter out, so that can end up going up into the air and coming back down in the form of precipitation. Another one is called dioxins. Dioxins are a group of chemicals, probably one of the worst things you can put into the environment. They're found in fly ash and they're found in all these different aspects of burning garbage. So that stuff, we don't want to put that out. They're expensive to build, and if we're burning our garbage, it really does kind of discourage recycling. That's not really a good thing. We'd rather do that than burn the garbage. So, incineration, there is some problems with that. All right, last couple topics here. Hazardous waste. A lot of what we throw out is considered hazardous. This stuff ends up getting in landfills, and if it ends up getting in landfills, then it could leach into water supplies, whatever. But hazardous waste is any discarded, solid or liquid, that is toxic, ignitable, corrosive, or reactive enough to explode or release toxic fumes. Now, typically, there's two, kind of general classes of hazardous waste. Heavy metals is one, and also POPs, synthetic organic compounds. Those are all things that would be considered hazardous. Hazardous waste in the environment, it could get into groundwater. One of the things about these, especially POPs, is they could react with other things in the environment and create even more dangerous chemicals. We call that synergism. Synergism is when different chemicals react together and they form something even worse. These things can bioaccumulate, they can biomagnify, and again, they're persistent. They can stay in the environment for a very, very long time. And a lot of them are mobile, right? For example, heavy metals get into the soil. If there's acid rain, they can mobilize those heavy metals and they can make their way into local rivers and streams. I just threw this up here because, just take a look at it for a minute or so and think about some things that you have in your house. Maybe you have some of these things in your garage. I'm sure that your parents have a can of